your old pal said, son, you've got a friend in me. Yeah, you've got a friend in me.
The bell calls us together in covenant, to share, to reflect, to hear with open hearts. Today, let us especially remember our covenant to affirm and promote the fifth principle, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. Good morning. Welcome to virtual worship with Community Unitarian Universalist Congregation in White Plains. I'm the Reverend Meredith Garmon, Community UU Minister, coming to you from the congregation's sanctuary here on what was once Lenape land.
Good morning. I'm Tracy Brenneman, religious educator for this congregation in my home in northern Westchester, also formerly land of the Lenape Nation.
I'm Adam Kent, the music director of CUUC, coming to you live from Manhattan, the island which, according to legend, Peter Minuet purchased for the Dutch from the native Lenapes for $24 worth of trinkets.
Welcome to this home of religious liberalism.
It's a blessing you were born.
It matters what you do.
Your experience of the divine is true.
And you don't have to go it alone.
Today is the fifth Sunday of winter. The waxing gibbous moon will be full on Thursday.
Thank you for being here. It's good to be together. Our shared light is a beacon of hope.
If you are a first-time attendee and comfortable doing so, please introduce yourself in the chat. The chat is also for reporting any technical issues. When you do post in the chat, please make sure you're writing to all panelists and attendees, not just panelists, so everyone will see your message. If you're visiting us this morning, you'll find a link to our order of service on our website, cuucwp.org. There's also a phone number for dialing in if you need to, and resources to help keep us connected during this time. We have a number of ways you can support and care for our community. For January, our Share the Plate funds go to the Interfaith Council for New Americans. We're able to take contributions via PayPal for your pledge, the plate share, the minister's discretionary fund. You'll find the donate button on our homepage at cuucwp.org.
On the fifth Sunday of each season, we dedicate our chalice to our fifth principle, the right of conscience and the use of democratic process.
Hi, I'm Joe Majak. As the chair of the board for this congregation, I welcome you. We will hold a congregational vote on Sunday, February 14th, 2021, following worship, to vote on the following two matters. 1, adoption of the eighth principle, and 2, approval of the ordination of CUUC member Patriot Toms as a Unitarian Universalist minister. In keeping with our tradition of creating opportunities for discussion ahead of congregational votes, we will conduct a final online eighth principle discussion on Friday, February 5th at 7 p.m. via Zoom. This will be for anyone wishing to learn more. The session will be co-moderated by Jeff Tomlinson, Eighth Principle Committee Chair, and myself. If you are looking for the Zoom login info, please check the event calendar in the CUUC website, or check the email announcement, which was distributed to the entire congregation earlier this week. Now it's time to light our chalice. On the fifth Sunday of the season, we dedicate our chalice to the fifth principle of our faith, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process. How fitting that America's inauguration ceremony falls during a time we dedicate to the use of the democratic process. Please join with me in the chalice lighting words from the Passover Haggadah. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers, to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, Spirit of freedom.
Fausto Sozzini, also known by the Latin form Faustus Socinus, at age 38 in Basel, he finished On Jesus Christ the Savior, which argued that Jesus saved us not by dying, but because his example shows us how to live. Sozzini's previous works had argued that reason is an authority equal to Scripture, that Jesus was divine by office rather than by nature, that the soul was not immortal, and that Scriptures were historical texts. Meanwhile, in Transylvania, where Ferenc David, Giorgio Biandrata, and King John Sigismund had established Unitarianism, the fledgling religious movement was encountering setbacks. King John had died, Biandrata faced charges of immorality, and David had gone a little too far when he took the position that prayers need not be addressed to Jesus, for which he faced imprisonment for innovation if he wouldn't recant. Biandrata's charges of immorality left him with no influence with his erstwhile friend and colleague David, but Sozzini's works had come to Biandrata's attention, so he called on the young Italian to come to Transylvania to see if some sense could be talked into David. Fausto Sozzini went to Transylvania via Krakow and spent 4.5 months in 1578 and into 1579 under David's roof, trying to convince David of the compromise position of saying that no matter who the prayer is addressed to, it is received by Christ as mediator for transmission to the Father. But David's position hardened, and from his pulpit he began denouncing the worship of Jesus. David was arrested, incarcerated at the fortress of Diva, where the old man miserably perished in less than 3 months. Fausto Sozzini left before David's trial began. He went to Poland, where as the father of Unitarianism there, his life would have its greatest impact.
The music I'm playing this morning reflects the efforts of certain composers to transcend the assumptions and expectations of their surroundings and their trainings, as they embraced inspiration from other cultures and traditions. In this sense, they might be said to have achieved greatness by resisting the biases of their upbringings. Domenico Scarlatti was the scion of a legendary musical dynasty based in Naples, Italy. As a young composer in the early 18th century, Domenico was expected to produce the sort of religious music and opera associated with his father, Alessandro. It wasn't until he left Italy to become a court musician in Portugal and then in Spain that he discovered his true artistic voice as he explored the folk music and indigenous culture of Iberia. Here is one of the 555 keyboard sonatas he composed there, the kind of work that prompted his father to proclaim, "My son is an eagle whose wings are growing. He must not remain idle in the nest, and I must not hinder his flight."
These are our times. On this fifth Sunday of winter, as we especially remember our fifth principle, the right of conscience, the use of democracy. The word seriousness has been on my mind. An article this week by Tom Nichols made the case that the rioters who stormed the Capitol on January 6th and the administration of the last 4 years were unserious. The rioters thought they were serious. They appear to have been prepared to have murdered a number of elected officials and might have thought they were willing to die for what they thought they were doing, yet they were not serious. They behaved as peevish children rather than adults, which reminds us that we have heard the phrase, the adult in the room, a lot in recent years, reflecting that lately rooms that needed to have a preponderance of adults too often had at most one. Nichols said, seriousness is the burden of knowing that we own our own decisions, that our actions have consequences. It's the sense of responsibility that helps us act without being ordered to act. The instinct that tells us, even when we are alone, that we owe a duty to others, that our behavior affects them as much as it does ourselves. To be serious is not to be humorless. We should all revel occasionally in our own silliness. Play refreshes the soul, but seriousness is the ability to know the difference between work and play. The wisdom to know when to stop laughing and pay attention, weigh our words, consider our actions beyond the intemperate advice of our own impulses. It is to know the difference between what is real and what is imagined. Nichols goes on to say that seriousness is the greatest requisite of a stable democracy because it allows us to think beyond the moment and to accept the weight of duty and communal responsibility. Only seriousness produces the mindset that is central to democracy. We are adults who are masters of our fates instead of irresponsible and powerless children. Seriousness is the civic reflex that allows us to step outside of ourselves and consider whether we would think well of someone who said or did what we are considering saying or doing. Children must learn this lesson, or they remain stunted narcissists into adulthood. The insurrectionists were so unserious, they somehow got it into their heads that they could overwhelm the Capitol, take Congress hostage, rerun the presidential election, after which apparently everyone would exchange congratulations on a job well done, retire to the hotel for a few drinks, and then fly home with wonderful memories and stories to tell. We know this because, like the narcissistic children they are, they could not stop talking to their phones and taking selfies and videos, even in the midst of violent insurrection. Extremist groups online often use jokes and arch irony to lure in recruits. They pose a serious risk of seditious violence precisely because they are not serious people. The last week feels like a reclamation of seriousness. The tone of Wednesday's inauguration was serious. I was moved to tears, and perhaps you were too. I must have read a dozen columns from writers, men and women, who said they cried. Who knew adulting would be so moving? And as the arrests roll in, as judges deny bail for suspects in the riot, and as the White House orders a comprehensive assessment of domestic extremism, the seriousness, the adulthood in the land feels most welcome. If you have a joy, sorrow, or milestone that you'd like to share, I invite you to enter it into the chat now. And as you do so, please make the first word be either joy, sorrow, or milestone, so that as I scan through the chat stream during the prayer, I can easily identify which messages are meant for me to say out loud. And as always, that part of the prayer where I speak your words will not be included when the service is posted later on YouTube. Now, the spoken invocation, and then sing along with the sung invocation. Words of invocation this morning from Sophia Lyon Foz. We gather in reverence before the wonder of life, the wonder of this moment, the wonder of being together, so close yet so apart. Each hidden in our own secret chamber, each listening, each trying to speak, yet none fully understanding, none fully understood. We gather in reverence before all intangible things that eyes see not nor ears can detect, that hands can never touch, that space cannot hold, and that time cannot measure. Now let us affirm together the aspiration from We Would Be One. I invite you to sing along with the Unitarian Universalists of Santa Monica.
We would be one as now we join in singing our hymn of love to pledge ourselves anew to that high cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. We would be one in living for each other, to show to all a new community.
The mission of Community Unitarian Universalist Congregation is the covenant of this congregation. Would all the members and visitors who would like to affirm it along with me? We covenant to nurture each other in our spiritual journeys, foster compassion and understanding within and beyond our community, and engage in service to transform ourselves and our world. Now we'll hear from our choir.
I've been a-walking with the Lord for many a day. Nothing's gonna stumble my feet. Trying to abide in the straight and narrow way. Nothing's gonna stumble my feet. But when my time on earth is done, and I hear my name, and I hear my name. Oh, when my time on earth is done, these weary feet are gonna run stumble. No, I'm not gonna slip. No, nothing gonna stumble my feet when I go to walk that golden street. Now the devil is a liar and a cheater too. Nothing gonna stumble my feet. And if he gets his way, he'll make a slider out of you. Nothing gonna stumble my feet. But if you listen for the Spirit's voice in the moment of truth, moment of truth. Oh, if you listen for the Spirit's voice, He'll help you make the right choice. Not gonna stammer, not gonna trip, not gonna stumble, no, I'm not gonna slip, no, nothing gonna stumble my feet when I go to walk that golden street. That golden street, not gonna waver, falter, sway or fall, not gonna tumble or slide, not gonna waver, falter, sway or fall, not gonna stumble at all, not gonna stammer, not gonna trip, not gonna stumble, no, I'm not gonna slip. No, nothing gonna stumble my feet when I go to walk that golden street. Not gonna stammer, not gonna trip, no, I'm not gonna stumble, no, I'm not gonna slip. No, nothing gonna stumble my feet when I go to walk that golden street. Not gonna stammer, not gonna trip, no, I'm not gonna stumble, no, I'm not gonna slip, no, nothing gonna stumble my feet when I go to walk that golden street, that golden street. Not gonna stammer, not gonna trip, not gonna stumble, no, I'm not gonna slip, not gonna stammer, not gonna trip, not gonna stumble, no, I'm not gonna slip, not gonna stammer, not gonna trip, not gonna stumble, no, I'm not gonna slip when I go to walk that golden street. Not gonna stumble my feet.
Our story this morning is The Crayon Box That Talked by Shane DeRolf and illustrated by Michael Letzig. This story reminds us to honor and celebrate the ways in which we are beautifully different. Check the emailed order of service and the RE newsletter for a children's activity sheet related to the story. While walking in a toy store the day before today, I overheard a crayon box with many things to say. "I don't like red," said Yellow, and Green said, "Nor do I, and no one here likes orange, but no one knows just why. We are a box of crayons that doesn't get along," said Blue to all the others. "Something here is wrong." Well, I bought that box of crayons and took it home with me and laid out all the colors so the crayons could all see. They watched me as I colored with red and blue and green and black and white and orange and every color in between. They watched as green became the grass and blue became the sky. The yellow sun was shining bright on white clouds drifting by. Colors changed as they touched, becoming something new. They watched me as I colored. They watched till I was through. And when I'd finally finished, I began to walk away. As I did, the crayon box had something more to say. "I do like red," said Yellow. And Green said, "So do I." And Blue, "You were terrific, so high up in the sky." We are a box of crayons, each of us unique. But when we get together, the picture is complete.
For our prayer, I want to share with you a reading, the second half of the poem that many of you heard on Wednesday from The Hill We Climb, worth repeating, the inauguration poem by Amanda Gorman. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith, we trust. For while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour. But within it, we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be. A country that is bruised, but whole, benevolent, but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left with. Every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the wind-swept northeast where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover. And every known nook of our nation and every corner called our country, our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dream blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if only we brave enough to see it, if only we brave enough to be it. And so for all that has been spoken and all else that we hold in our hearts today, we observe 30 seconds of silence.
Blessed be, and amen.
Calling on you, hungry hearts, everywhere through endless time. You who wander, you who thirst, I offer you this heart of mine. Calling on you, hungry spirits, all the lost and the left behind. All I can, I'll share with you, your joy and your sorrow, I make it mine.
Leave it to Aaron Copeland, a Jewish boy from Brooklyn, to embrace blues, rodeo music, Latin American idioms, and jazz as resources in classical composition. Here is the first of his 4 piano blues.
Advertisers know that slogans work, so let's put them to a positive use. Adopting these slogans as your personal guides and reminders will help bring more peace and more joy into your life. Maybe you could use a little more peace and joy. Journaling about how you are implementing a given slogan will help internalize it. This winter's series has included Stay Close to Your Resentment and Get Excited. This week's slogan is Find Strength. Strength comes in many forms: endurance, losing on the little things in order to win on the big ones. Restraint is a strength. Start by making a list of your strengths. Maybe intelligence, honesty, bearing pain, a knack for recognizing good in others, or just surviving. This'll help you feel stronger. Then, think about good things you use your strengths for. Notice that it's good to be strong. Recall times you felt strong and what your body felt like then. Tell yourself that you are strong, you can endure, persist, cope, and prevail, and can hold your experience in awareness without being overwhelmed. For the rest of Rick Hanson's pointers for how to live this slogan, find strength, see the post at cucmatters.org. The link is in your eCommunitarian.
Friends, it is possible to be at peace. It is possible to make peace with that inner critic. It's possible to cherish the unique gift that you are to the universe. It's possible to be self-aware, and it's possible to be continually dedicated to reality. Last week, I talked about dedication to reality, and today I'm going to mention some of the things we're up against in that dedication. It isn't possible to have certain knowledge of what that reality is, but you can, nevertheless, be dedicated to it. I think my very favorite Wikipedia entry is the list of cognitive biases. It's a long list. It just goes on and on of ways that our brain plays tricks on us and misleads us. It lists, I think, 193 ways of human brains systematically going wrong. For instance, one of them is called the IKEA effect. It's the tendency for people to overestimate the quality of a product that they partially assembled themselves. And we have hindsight bias, which I mentioned last week, sometimes called the I knew it all along effect. It's the tendency to see past events as having been predictable. In one classic psychology experiment, College students were asked to predict whether they thought then nominee Clarence Thomas would be confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court. Prior to the Senate vote, 58% of the students thought Thomas would be confirmed. The students were then polled after Thomas's confirmation, and a whopping 78% of students said they had believed Thomas would be confirmed. If you lose a coin toss with a friend, there's a little part of you that wants to think somehow you knew you were going to lose. When students get their exams back and see the items they missed and what the correct answer was, they often get the feeling that they did know that answer, but just had a weird mental lapse. That's hindsight bias at work. When an unprecedented event occurs, the brain wants to know how this happened, and it will look for causes that make the most sense. And that's a very rational response. It's just that in the process, we put together a causal story that strikes us as so convincing that it makes the event itself appear to have been predictable. We've known for decades about the self-fulfilling prophecy, the effect in classrooms that have when teachers are told that certain students did very well on a standardized test, even though the students didn't. The teachers then tend to subtly express higher expectations of those students going forward, and the students tend to rise to meet what is expected of them. We also tend to unconsciously fit ourselves into stereotypes. If an Asian woman's Asian identity is highlighted before she takes a math test, she performs better. If her female identity is highlighted, she performs worse. If men performing an athletic test believe that the task measures sports intelligence, white men perform better. If the same task is characterized as measuring natural athletic ability, black men perform better. Subjects were asked to put on a white coat before performing an attention task. Some subjects were told it was a doctor's coat, and some were told it was a painter's coat. The ones who were told it was a doctor's coat did better on the attention task. Did you see that one coming? If so, I refer you back to the hindsight bias. Agent detection bias is a big one. If our tendency to, agent detection bias is our tendency to see in events the working of an agent, some kind of intelligence with an agenda it is aiming to advance. We think we detect an agent mastermind behind what may really be thousands of individual unrelated decisions, or what might be random phenomena like the weather. Agent detection bias would seem to have a lot to do with certain religious beliefs and with the attractiveness of conspiracy theories. Confirmation bias is another big one. We attune to evidence that confirms what we already believe. We look for the evidence that supports our theory and overlook evidence that disconfirms it. The internal defense lawyer in defense of your current theories works a lot harder than the internal prosecution. Confirmation bias may include the ostrich effect, burying our head in the sand to avoid information that would disprove your thesis. A variant of confirmation bias called belief bias is the tendency to evaluate the logical strength of an argument higher when we believe the conclusion. So it's a rare thing for a person to say, I do believe the claim is true, but not for the reason you gave. Confirmation bias manifests as only following people on social media who share your viewpoints and choosing the news sources more likely to run stories that support your views and outright refusing to listen to opposing evidence. Nor can we trust our memory of events. Memories are influenced by choice of words used to describe them. In one classic experiment by memory expert Elizabeth Loftus, people who watched a video of a car crash were then asked one of two slightly different questions. How fast were the cars going when they hit each other? Or how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? Now, that shouldn't matter, should it? You can call it hit or call it smashed into, but it doesn't change what happened, right? The whole half glass empty, half glass full thing makes me want to say, oh, come on, it's the same thing. 50% of the area contained by the glass is air and 50% is water, and that's the state of affairs to which both half empty and half full refer, so it doesn't matter which you call it. If someone was telling me that two cars smashed into each other, you might have a more dramatic impression than if they said that the cars hit each other. But if you've already watched the videotape for yourself, then surely it doesn't matter which term is used. Except it does. When the witnesses were then questioned a week later whether they had seen any broken glass, those who had been asked the smashed into version of the question were more likely to report incorrectly that they had seen broken glass. Watching television coverage changes how people remember an event. In fact, your own coverage of your own memory of an event changes the memory. Every time you recall a memory, you are recalling it because it's somehow meaningful to the current situation. And the meaning connection to the current situation skews the memory. And then there's actor-observer bias. That's the tendency to attribute our mistakes to external influences and other people's mistakes to their character. We then tend to attribute our successes to our character and other people's successes to some external factor. If you botched an important meeting, it's because you had jet lag. If a colleague botched a meeting, it's because they're lazy and incompetent. If you cut off somebody in traffic, it's because there's really an important thing that you have to get to. If someone else cuts you off in traffic, it's because they're a jerk. On the other hand, if you get a promotion, it's clearly because you deserved it. And if someone else gets a promotion, you're more likely to think of situational factors unrelated to ability. You are indeed a wonderful and uniquely beautiful gift to the universe. And every one of these biases is a good thing. That is, they come from functions that by and large do good for us and are helpful, even though they sometimes go awry. And I will talk about appreciating the upside while mitigating the downside in the next part. Adam?
As he developed his own voice as a composer in the late 19th century, Claude Debussy had to address a prevailing bias of the time, that where musical works were concerned, the bigger, the longer, the more serious, the better. Grandiose operatic spectacles were the expectation of composers who wanted to be labeled great. Debussy seemed to thumb his nose at those expectations in a piece like Gollywog's Cakewalk, which I'm about to play for you, which is a sort of tribute to American vaudeville. And if you listen carefully, at one point actually seems to make fun of the super serious opening of Wagner's opera Tristan und Isolde.
I'm hoping to offer some reflections on our human evolution and how we come about and negotiate these biases we have and that other people around us have and that we can't get rid of, but we can manage. Human evolution needed mechanisms that grab our attention, steer us away from danger. Every human brain is two systems attempting to operate side by side. There's head, what we call head, we think of it as cognitive, reason, and then there's what feels more like it's coming from the gut, although that too is brain processing, it's feelings and intuitions. If you want reasoning, head is there for you. Head's gonna have to stop and think about it. Head is slow. But if you need a snap judgment, gut is there for you. Gut doesn't worry with having to explain itself. Often you can't explain your hunches or your intuitions. Your gut operates below the radar of consciousness. It checks for the most readily available examples it can find in the brain's storage. Gut cannot even tell the difference between your firsthand experience and someone else's stories. Gut believes the examples that are most readily at hand. Statistics completely fail to hold gut's attention. Gut just fixates on one or two lurid stories. The dual control system was adaptive for our hunter-gatherer ancestors, and it's still pretty adaptive for us. You need your gut instincts, your moral intuitions, even if you can't rationally justify or explain them. Reasoning is great when you have the time for it. If you need to buy a new washing machine, you can list your criteria and do some research on how each machine rates on price, energy efficiency, water use, load capacity, cleaning efficacy, durability, and repair record. You can work out some way of balancing strengths in some areas with weaknesses in others, and you make your selection. Now, imagine what your life would be like if at every moment, in every social situation, picking the right thing to do or say became like picking the best washing machine. Minute after minute, day after day, you would make foolish decisions too. We need our shortcuts. Reasoning it all out is just too slow and tedious. Hindsight bias exaggerates the predictability of an event in order to help you pay attention to and remember those causal factors going forward. And when you get that exam back and you see what you missed, you might say, I knew that. Well, probably you didn't, but telling yourself you did helps you remember it going forward. Fitting into expectations, like the students that perform better when the teacher thinks they will. This is a product of our amazing skill at being the hyper-social species we are. We're so good at picking up even the most subtle cues from those around us and finding our niche in the world. Yes, we sometimes undersell ourselves and sometimes oversell ourselves, but at root is this astonishing drive to be a meaningful part of shared cooperative enterprise, to find our place. And it's our hypersociability that also accounts for the agent detection bias. We're so attuned to interpreting what people do, to understanding their behavior as products of their belief and desires, that our own sense of self is an after effect. We first begin to understand others' behavior as coming from believing and desiring, and then we turn that same lens on our own behavior and construct a self of beliefs and desires to account for what we notice our body doing and saying. So, of course, we're prone to apply the same lens to natural phenomena, and, for instance, see the weather as the product of the sky god's agency, or see a conspiracy behind uncoordinated individual actions. It's an amazing and glorious thing to be so hypersocial, so attuned to each other as we are. Confirmation bias may be an effect of the need to be efficient with mental resources. We've got 100 billion neurons, but not infinite mental capacity for processing information. So we conserve the mental energy we need for decision making by looking for confirmation of what already seems most likely. Sometimes we're wrong about that, but by and large, it's adaptive. And here too, our hypersociality seems to have a role. We look for confirmation of what our group thinks, because this helps us bond together as a group sharing a reality. In the 200,000 years Homo sapiens has existed, we didn't develop the scientific method until the last 500 years, the last 0.25% of our time on Earth. And it only happened when, among other factors, we had enough resource and material security that we didn't have to care what the outcome of the experiment was. We could be disinterested, though not uninterested, and just be curious, open equally to any result. We never got away from our need to bond in community, but a community was able to arise for which loyalty was to the process and methods rather than to outcomes. And that community is the scientific community. As for the tricks that memory plays on us, just remember the Dustin Hoffman character from the 1988 film Rain Man? He could remember things perfectly, but he couldn't make meaning of them. The ability to make meaning of events sifts and skews the memory into what's meaningful about it. And then we remember the meaning, but not the details of exactly what happened. After I've enjoyed a sporting event, I sometimes like to watch the post-game show, precisely because the coverage of the event will skew my memory of it, generally in ways that make the memory more meaningful and more fun. Of course, if my favorite team lost, I'm not going to be interested in the post-game analysis. The amazing wonder of our meaning-making capacity, our delight in a world which makes some sense, is dependent on a certain malleability of memory. So those memory foibles are the byproducts of a tremendous gift. And knowing about how those foibles work and why we can enjoy and why they work that way, we can then enjoy the gift with a little less of the shadow. One of those gifts can be the beauty and pleasure of diversity. Biases, of course, orient us to in-group loyalty. But knowing that that's a bias and not the truth opens us to appreciate the contributions of difference, like the different colors in that crayon box. So, pay attention. It's great that you have processing capacity that can jump to a conclusion in those times when you need a quick conclusion. But when you know that's what your brain is doing, then you can ask, do I need a quick conclusion right now? Are there details here that I do have time to pay attention to? Breathe. A deep breath or two sends oxygen throughout the body, letting you relax, letting the slower, rational systems come online. Be curious. When you don't need a judgment, don't judge. You can choose to simply be openly curious. Maybe they aren't a jerk for cutting you off in traffic, but have a real, recognizable, urgent need that if you knew, you would surely sympathize. When you slow down, you become able to imagine those things and can extend the sympathy even if you never find out what the real story is on why you were cut off in traffic. Curiosity about your own behavior might lead you to set aside a self-serving rationalization. And it might reveal to you something else about yourself that you can nevertheless have self-compassion for. And finally, abandon certainty. All we have are provisional guesses. Dedication to reality doesn't mean that we ever know what it is. It just means we're continually looking for our delusions, continually noticing them, continually peeling them back, but also blessing them for the gifts that they signify. Friends, it is possible to be at peace. It is possible to make peace with that inner critic, recognizing that the goofs and mistakes come from the same source as our gifts. It is possible to cherish the unique gift that you are to the universe. You have made meaning through creative interaction of your genetic inheritance with your experiences. You bring the result to the human table from which we are all nourished. Thank you for all that you are, every one of you. Blessed be. Amen.
Please sing along again with our own congregation in 2018, hymn number 347, Gather the Spirit.
Please say with me these words as we extinguish our chalices. Our chalice extinguished, the flame of conscience and the light of the democratic method are now ours to carry forward.
by the light of our promise to affirm and promote democracy and the rights of conscience,
by the flame of our individual lights, and by the wisdom and compassion we only find and make together.
Thus may we find our way, go in hope,
go in love,
and go in peace.
If you got troubles, then I've got them too. There isn't anything I wouldn't do for you. If we stick together, we can see it through. 'Cause you've got a friend in me. Yeah, you've got a friend in me. Now some of you folks might be a little bit smarter than I am. Maybe, but none of them will ever love you the way I do. Just me and you, boy. And as the years go by, our friendship will never die. You're gonna see it's our destiny. You've got a friend in me. You've got a friend in me.
Love the Bernie meme. The Habsburgs did their best to keep the Ottoman Turks out of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but the Viennese always loved their coffee, and they also loved their military music, so-called Janissary music, and Mozart captured the sounds of that in his famous Rondo alla Turca.
you.